Wuhan shipyard. Hasn't a new Chinese submarine with an X-rudder appeared? Then let's talk about the new features or new ways of playing that will emerge in China's future submarines, whether nuclear-powered or conventional ones. Wuhan shipyard mainly builds conventional submarines. Currently, China's nuclear-powered submarines are basically produced at Bohai shipyard, which is Huludao shipyard. As we can see, in front of this X-rudder submarine, there's another one, the Hangar submarine, purchased by Pakistan. We can see that the Hangar submarine is shorter than this X-rudder submarine. Pakistan's 20, its Kailan-class submarine, is itself a scaled-down version of the Type 39 submarine. It is mainly reduced in length and is also equipped with AIP. Now, looking at this X-rudder submarine, its width is similar to that of Pakistan's submarine, but its length is a bit longer. It can be basically judged that this one is a modified version of the Type 39, the latest improved version of the Type 39. It is likely that it is a further development of the Type 39C with an X-rudder. Will it be called Type 39D? We need to observe further and see what official announcements will come out in the future. In fact, up to now, there are 4 schemes for conventional submarines in various countries around the world to operate underwater for a relatively long time. One is from France. Looking at the top left corner, the French Scorpion class, which is authorized to be produced in India, uses this kind of closed-cycle engine. It directly adds oxygen to the diesel engine to allow the submarine to work underwater. The biggest disadvantage of the closed-cycle engine is that it is relatively noisy. Therefore, only countries with relatively low levels like France use closed-cycle engines, while other countries do not adopt this kind of AIP system. Then, looking at the bottom left corner, it is a German scheme. Germany uses fuel cells, which react with hydrogen and oxygen. Fuel cells are quite difficult to develop, but their advantages are good silence performance, and the underwater cruising speed using batteries is relatively fast. Its underwater speed can reach about 8 to 9 knots. If you use this AIP method, the underwater speed can reach 8-9 knots. As for the Stirling engine, the one in the bottom right corner is our country's Type 39B. The Type 39B is China's first conventional submarine using the AIP system with a Stirling engine. Compared with fuel cells, the Stirling engine is relatively noisier. Because the Stirling engine relies on the thermal expansion and contraction of gas to drive the piston to do work, its noise is relatively louder than that of fuel cells, but it has better silence effect than the French closed-cycle diesel engine. What about Japan? Japan's Taige class mainly uses lithium batteries, and it still uses liquid lithium batteries. Liquid lithium batteries are relatively easy to explode. Japan is bold enough, and it is the only country in the world that dares to do this. It is estimated that other countries dare not use liquid lithium batteries. They basically endure it, at most with a bit more noise, using Stirling engines. Or if they have the high level like Germany, using fuel cells, various hydride reaction fuel cells. However, Germany's AIP has a big disadvantage. We can see that its hydrogen storage is placed under the submarine. That is to say, if this hydride is used up, to replace it, the submarine has to enter a dry dock for replacement, which is very inconvenient. Relatively speaking, however, Germany's system is quite safe. It's unclear how they manage their hydrides. Germany's chemical industry is very powerful. During the pandemic, the Bayer Group even set up a factory in China, so their level is relatively high. Other countries in the world also want to use fuel cells. For example, Russia and the former Soviet Union have thought of using fuel cells made of a hydrogen compound, but they were not very successful. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union even had a submarine using this kind of fuel cell, which had an accident. Later, in the 21st century, the Soviet Union, Russia, also developed the Lada class, which also uses hydride fuel cells. But as we know, so far only 2 Lada class submarines have been produced, and it seems that the fuel cells of the Lada class were not installed in the end, which kept our country waiting for a long time. As we talked about earlier, this kind of hydride fuel cell has good underwater silence performance first, and second, its underwater speed is relatively faster than that of the Stirling engine. However, Russia finally failed to get it right, so we did not introduce the Lada class in the end. These are the 4 main popular methods on the market now. Our country currently uses Stirling engines. The closed-cycle engine is the worst in terms of technology, so our country will definitely not engage in it. As for lithium batteries, it depends on solid-state lithium batteries. I heard that solid-state lithium batteries are developing rapidly in China, and they are basically stable in laboratories. Now we just need to wait for commercialization, which is estimated to be 5 years later, when they can be put into large-scale use. If you use solid-state lithium batteries, their energy density is much higher than that of existing ternary lithium batteries or BYD's lithium iron sulfate batteries, basically more than 3 times higher. After Japan adopted this kind of liquid lithium battery, its underwater cruising speed can basically reach the speed of Germany's fuel cell, about 8 knots, while our Stirling engine is relatively slow, about 4-5 knots. If you use solid-state lithium batteries, your underwater endurance time will be at least 3 times higher than that of Japan's titanium lithium batteries, or your underwater speed can be greatly increased, faster than 8-9 knots. Of course, if the speed increases, your underwater endurance time will be shortened. Japan now uses lithium batteries, and the underwater endurance time is only about 1 week, while the AIP systems using fuel cells or Stirling engines can basically be used underwater for about 2 to 3 weeks. If solid-state lithium batteries are used, compared with Germany's fuel cells, they are much more convenient and less dangerous. The hydrogen compounds are stored in very thick tanks, and their manufacturing is also very difficult. Therefore, German submarines are not selling very well now. Our Type 209 submarines are sold all over the world and are one of the best-selling submarines in the world. But in the new century, after Germany used this kind of fuel cell, people have many doubts. Its export model is called Type 214, but the export of Type 214 is not so ideal, and many markets have been taken by French submarines with closed-cycle engines, because, for example, Russia does not have an AIP system now. The biggest problem with our country's submarines is that most of them use diesel engines authorized by Germany, which made us subject to others' control before. For example, we failed to sell them to Thailand. As for France, although its performance is not very good, it can still be used. For example, the French Scorpion class sells relatively well. Indonesia has bought 2 Scorpion class submarines this time, and it seems that Brazil has also bought some. Many countries are now buying Scorpion class submarines. But in the previous generation of submarines, French submarines did not sell well. It seems that they were only sold to Pakistan or someone else, and the sales volume was not large anyway. But in the new century, its submarines use their own diesel engines and their own AIP systems. Relatively speaking, they are much better than Germany's export-oriented Type 214 and fuel cell ones in terms of economy, safety, and maintainability. So the Scorpion class sells a lot. For Type 214, it seems that only Italy has bought it, but Italy bought Type 212, which is the same version as Germany's. Compared with Type 212, Type 214 is larger. South Korea, Greece, and Singapore have also bought Type 214, but the Scorpion class has now sold more than Type 214. Let's look at the next picture, the comparison chart of this new X-rudder submarine. We can see that it seems to be a bit longer than the Type 39A. The Type 39A does not have an AIP system. For example, the AIP system was installed on the Type 39B. So it is a section longer than the Type 39A, which may be the AIP section. That is the Stirling engine section. So it is a section longer. Will China's conventional submarines adopt single-hull designs? I think there is a chance, because there are single-hull foreign trade products now on sale, but no one buys them because they are not equipped domestically. Our single-hull submarines are mainly of 100-ton, 600-ton, and 200-ton classes. It is basically judged that there is still no vertical launch system at this time, because if a vertical launch system is installed on a conventional submarine, it is equivalent to adding a section of cabin, which will make the submarine longer, and the underwater maneuverability will decrease. A while ago, CCTV reported that in the future, we will focus on nuclear submarines, and conventional submarines will basically play a supporting role. In the future, conventional submarines may be smaller than the Type 39. After all, the Type 39 is a submarine of over 30 tons, which is relatively large. So next, our domestic conventional submarines may be smaller than the Type 39, probably around 20 tons, which will be a bit larger than Germany's Type 214 or Type 212. Both the submarines we use domestically and the exported ones are double-hulled. Many people think that double-hulled submarines are not as good as single-hulled ones, but this is not actually the case. In fact, there are trade-offs between single-hulled and double-hulled submarines. Of course, if you use a single hull under the same ship's internal volume, that is, in terms of usable volume, a single-hulled submarine will be smaller than a double-hulled one. If it is smaller, either its speed will be faster or the power input required will be smaller. This is certainly an advantage of the single hull. However, with the development of hydroacoustics, double-hulled submarines not only have the advantage of greater reserve buoyancy compared to single-hulled ones, but also, according to hydroacoustic streamline theory, we can see that there are more ways to design double-hulled submarines now. We know that previous double-hulled submarines were similar to single-hulled ones, almost round, but of course, they were less regular and less round. An obvious example now is Russia's Typhoon class, which is double-hulled. It has two load-bearing inner shells inside, so the entire submarine is elliptical. Let's look at Germany's Type 212 CD, a conventional submarine, which is Germany's next-generation conventional submarine, weighing about 500 tons. It has signed a contract with Norway, but hasn't started construction yet. However, it is obvious that the exterior of the submarine is no longer round. It is believed that this shape is more in line with hydroacoustics, and may have lower resistance and noise in terms of water flow dynamics. So it is obviously a double-hulled submarine. Because if we look at the following picture, which shows a single hull and a double hull, it is obvious that a single hull can basically only be made into a regular circle, but a double hull can be made into an irregular circle, or like the German one, a shape somewhat like a fighter jet, a bit trapezoidal or rhomboidal. Compared with a single-hulled submarine, a double-hulled one allows for more diverse styling. That is to say, our country will still use this kind of double-hulled submarines in the future. As we know, the sale of the Type 39C was first proposed in a paper by Sweden, but in the end, it was our country that first built it. Sweden's submarines with such sails have not been launched yet. Germany has now also proposed a submarine design without an arc-shaped outer shell. Will our country be the first to build it? I think it is very likely. Because conventional submarines are no longer the main force, there will not be a particularly large number of them built in the future. So many manufacturers will have time to spare, right? They can conduct various experiments on conventional submarines, and if they work well, apply them to nuclear submarines. Therefore, I think it is very likely that polygonal submarines will first be commissioned in our country. China's future submarines may also have a polygonal hull like Germany's Type 212 CD. Our country is actually conducting various researches on submarines. The two above are both test submarines. We can see that they are actually not the same one. The sail of this submarine is actually in the middle of the vessel, while the sail of that submarine is relatively at the front of the vessel. This submarine uses a bow rudder. Most of our country's submarines use a sail rudder, but this submarine is a test of the bow rudder. The advantage of the bow rudder is that it has stronger underwater maneuverability, just like the X-rudder, which both have stronger underwater maneuverability. Now, nuclear submarines, including those of the United States and Russia, all use bow rudders. I think our country may also use bow rudders in the future, because test submarines are using bow rudders. These two vessels are actually not large. We can see that the people on these submarines are small compared to those on other submarines. Below are our current export submarines. The one mentioned just now is a 100-ton submarine. This one is 600 tons, and the one behind is 200 tons. This is the export version of our Type 39, now called the Kailan class, also known as S-20, and in Thailand, it is called S-26. Let's see if there are any comments. For those who have collected information in this regard, let's see if anyone has mentioned that the maximum diameter of non-nuclear submarines can reach the size of nuclear submarines. It just means that your submarine becomes thicker, right? In this case, when the wetted area increases, whether your power can keep up is a big problem. If your power can't keep up, you will run slowly. Actually, it still depends on the power. For nuclear power, because the power is large, it can be used in relatively large submarines, while conventional submarines have relatively small power. Another thing that everyone has been talking about is the small reactor. The biggest advantage of a small reactor is that it is also a nuclear reactor. Its characteristics are that it can have unlimited underwater endurance time sometimes, and its submerged speed will be much higher than that of ordinary submarines. But first, let's talk about what a small reactor is. Its actual characteristics. The nuclear submarines we see now are all based on nuclear fission, which generates heat to boil water, right? This drives the steam boiler, so it has great power. The small reactor actually uses a phenomenon in nuclear reactions called electron migration. As we can see, it generates electricity through electron migration. This electricity can either directly drive the motor or charge the battery, and there are various methods. Its characteristic is that it does not have the steam boiler of ordinary nuclear submarines, because it does not need to boil water, so its volume is greatly reduced compared to the normal nuclear reactors we see now. Its volume can be made much smaller. But its biggest disadvantage is that its energy conversion rate is much lower than that of our water-boiling nuclear fission reactors. Its energy conversion rate is only about 4 to 8%. For nuclear fission reactors, such as those used in US, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers or nuclear submarines, their thermal efficiency, that is, energy conversion rate, can basically reach more than 30%. So the power of the two is far apart, right? Therefore, such small reactors actually existed during the Cold War. However, because building such reactors was quite expensive, the main focus of the United States and the Soviet Union was on developing high-speed nuclear submarines, and they would not use small reactors. As for conventional submarines, the United States directly gave up on them. As for the Soviet Union, since its conventional submarines were a supplement to nuclear power, it would not build such small reactors. During the Cold War, such small reactors were mainly used in satellites of the United States and the Soviet Union, using this method of directly generating electricity through electron migration, because on satellites, if they are not equipped with such small reactors, solar panels are used, and the conversion rate of solar energy may be lower than that of small reactors. So during the Cold War, this was a US satellite, and this was the Soviet Union's Legenda system. The satellites of the Soviet Union's Legenda system were used to track US aircraft carriers in real time, and they used such small reactors. During the Cold War, Canada wanted to build submarines with small reactors, but after the Cold War ended, Canada disarmed and did not proceed with the project. After the Cold War, Canada directly bought the last batch of conventional submarines from the UK. Now, Canada seems to have no submarines at all, and it's hard to say whether they will have submarines in the future. The characteristic of a small reactor is that its power system is much smaller in volume compared to that of ordinary nuclear-powered submarines. That is, it can be installed on relatively small tonnage submarines. Of course, if you insist on installing a normal nuclear reactor of a nuclear submarine, you can also squeeze it into a 2 0-ton submarine. For example, France's former Rubis class used a normal nuclear reactor, but its characteristic is that the nuclear reactor has a complete set of equipment. In addition to the reactor, which takes up volume, the steam boiler and turbine also take up volume. In this case, if the submarine is relatively small, there will be no space for the shock absorption system. Therefore, although France's Rubis class is over 2 0-tons, it is very noisy. It is so noisy because it cannot be equipped with a shock absorption system. For relatively large submarines, they can be equipped with a shock absorption system inside. For example, the Seawolf class, which is over 9 0-tons, is quieter than the US Los Angeles class submarine, which is only over 6 0-tons. The key reason why the Seawolf class is quieter than the Los Angeles class is that it can be equipped with a larger shock absorption system, including Russian submarines, such as its Project 971 submarine, which weighs over 9 0-tons. Its noise level is roughly the same as that of the US Los Angeles class submarine, which is over 6 0-tons. Just think about it. The Project 971 Aquila is a submarine of over 9 0-tons, which is 50% larger than the Los Angeles class. Yet their noise levels are similar. The larger the submarine, or the larger the internal space of the vessel, the more capable it is to install a better shock absorption system. Small reactors do not have this problem. First, they are relatively small in size, so it is relatively easy to install shock absorption systems. Second, they drive electric motors through this electron migration method. As we know from driving electric cars are very quiet, right? If it is a diesel or gasoline engine, the diesel engine is even noisier. For example, ordinary gasoline-powered cars are obviously noisier than electric cars. The same applies to conventional nuclear-powered submarines. Conventional nuclear-powered submarines boil water, and the boiling water drives the turbine. So, just like ordinary cars, they are quite noisy. To reduce noise, you need to install such large shock absorption systems. What about small reactors? Will this be our next step? Internationally, small reactors are considered conventional submarines, not nuclear submarines, because they do not have the high speed of nuclear submarines. So many tactics cannot actually be implemented. What about the next step for the Type 39? Will our conventional submarines use small reactors? It has been said before that they would, but now it is unclear how much the cost of small reactors has decreased. Because our lithium battery technology is developing too fast, When comparing small reactors with lithium batteries, we need to compare which has a lower cost. After all, conventional submarines do not need to travel that far, and their unlimited endurance is actually not particularly significant for such conventional submarines. Being able to stay underwater for 2 to 3 weeks or 3 to 4 weeks is almost enough. After 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 weeks, the food will be almost gone, and you have to surface for supplies anyway. They are not as fast as nuclear submarines. Nuclear submarines can travel far underwater in 2 to 3 weeks, with a usual underwater speed of more than 20 knots, possibly traveling 10 kilometers a day. Compared with ordinary conventional submarines, your speed is not that much faster, right? So you can't travel very far directly, and you still have to surface to replenish normal supplies, such as food, water, and other daily necessities. That is to say, for small reactors, it depends on their cost. If the cost is too high compared to solid-state lithium batteries, our country may not equip them in large quantities. However, our country has been researching small reactors for a long time, and there are similar small reactors now. For example, among the fourth-generation reactors used in ground power stations, one type uses this small reactor technology, verifying the electron migration method instead of nuclear fission, and its safety is very high. In this case, it is possible that our small reactors could be installed on submarines, with 2 or 3 equipped for our own use to verify the technology, and then exported in the future. Such exports would have strong product competitiveness, because we know that lithium batteries are basically produced in China, followed by South Korea and Japan. European lithium batteries are basically not good, so you have to buy them in Asia, which would make your costs much higher. Well, in terms of exports, using such small reactors still has strong competitiveness. I think we may build 2 or 3 submarines with small reactors, and probably not many more. In the end, what will be mass-produced can only be such conventional submarines with solid-state lithium batteries. As for solid-state lithium batteries, as we can see, the highest energy density of lithium iron phosphate batteries is about 100 to 160 Wh/kg. Ternary lithium batteries are better, about twice that. Solid-state lithium batteries have an energy density of at least 3 times that of lithium iron phosphate batteries, and more than twice that of ternary lithium batteries. So this is a characteristic of solid-state lithium batteries. I am quite optimistic about conventional submarines with solid-state lithium batteries, because if you directly use such lithium batteries, the noise and underwater cruising speed will be much higher than those of Stirling engines. Now let's talk about pump jets. For conventional submarines, we may test 1 or 2 with pump jets. It can be basically determined that the Type 95 and Type 96 will adopt pump jets, but the use of pump jets in conventional submarines is not very meaningful. At that time, the Soviet Union's Kilo-class submarines tested pump jets, but we know that in the end, the Kilo-class mainly used 7-bladed propellers. The difference between pump jets and propellers is that pump jets work better at high speeds, but at low speeds, pump jets can actually be regarded as underwater jet engines. They have stators and rotors, where the stator is stationary and the rotor moves, and there is a casing outside. Its principle is actually the same as that of jet engines, except that jet engines eject gas, while pump jets eject water. So it is more efficient at high speeds, but at low speeds, its efficiency is not as good as that of the 7-bladed propeller. Conventional submarines are not fast. Even if you use the aforementioned small reactors or lithium batteries, under normal circumstances, your speed will not be very high, at most 8-10 knots. In this case, using such 7-bladed propellers, i.e. normal propellers, is far more efficient than using pump jets. Pump jets are basically only used in nuclear submarines. That is to say, for our exported submarines, I estimate that neither our domestic conventional submarines nor exported ones will use pump jets. In the end, they will still use such 7-bladed propellers. As for the next step for nuclear submarines, they will definitely use pump jets. One last thing. Will submarines use vertical launch systems? We can see that using large vertical launch systems is basically out of the question. This is our Changcheng 202 submarine, which can launch the JL-2. The JL-2 can basically only be installed in the sail, and the submarine has to sit lower. Like North Korea's submarine, its hump is almost as high as this sail. You can only launch missiles like Tomahawk or YJ-18 of this size, which can be placed inside the submarine. Will they be used? If you use such a vertical launch section, your submarine will be Wuxingjong longer. In this case, I have great doubts about whether conventional submarines will use them. After all, nuclear submarines are the main force, and conventional submarines only play a supporting role. You need to control the tonnage and mainly operate in coastal waters. In fact, whether to use vertical launch systems or not is not very significant, as they are optional. The Changcheng 201 has a 4-cell vertical launch system of normal size on its bow. I think vertical launch systems are not significant for conventional submarines, but it's a different story for exports, right? Let's not talk about North Korea. North Korea's is for launching strategic missiles, which can either hit Japan. They may not be able to reach the United States, but hitting Japan is not a big problem. South Korea has installed vertical launch systems on its submarines, with 6-cell vertical launch systems at the rear, and their tonnage exceeds 30 tons. As for us, it can be judged that the next generation of Type 39 submarines will be at most over 20 tons or even only over 10 tons, so it is unlikely to use vertical launch systems. Moreover, for the further development of Type 39, there is a high possibility that 1 or 2 will be equipped with vertical launch systems for our own use. Set an example for foreign countries, and finally let foreign customers purchase such conventional submarines with vertical launch systems. In conclusion, I personally believe that China's submarines can move in a new direction in the future, with a polygonal instead of a circular exterior. As for sail rudders, it's hard to say. Nuclear submarines may adopt bow rudders in the future, while conventional submarines may still use sail rudders. Because we can see that Germany's Type 212 and Type 214, including their future development, still use sail rudders, which must have their reasons. We can see that Germany's Type 212, which is 500 tons, still uses sail rudders instead of bow rudders, which must have its reasons. Because currently, including Japan's Taige class, which is already 40 tons, still uses sail rudders instead of bow rudders. Basically, the submarines that use bow rudders are all over 60 tons. So our conventional submarines may still use sail rudders, and bow rudders may be used by nuclear submarines. The shape of submarines may become more diverse in the future, including changes in sail rudders. It is possible that future nuclear submarines will adopt a shape similar to the Type 39C. As for X-rudders, we all know that their biggest advantage is better underwater maneuverability. But their original problem is that the control is relatively complex. However, with the progress of China's control technology, the control of X-rudders should no longer be a problem now. I believe that in the future, both China's conventional submarines and nuclear submarines will widely use X-rudders.